Alright, let's work our way through a bunch of these problems here for Chapter 2, Practice Statements, Reasons, homework number 16. Now your job is to correct this, so you should have tried them already, really. Okay, so let's do this. Let's tackle the perpendicular ones first, because we can kind of narrow down our choices this way. And the goal is to justify every statement with a reason. Now you'll notice I actually put all the reasons right over here just to help us reference them quickly. Okay, so let me pick a color here. I'll go with blue. Oh no, actually, let's go with green because the drawing's in blue. So this one says, if AB is perpendicular to BC, then you get a right angle. So if this one is perpendicular to this one, you get a right angle there. Okay. Well, let me do this. Let me highlight all the ones that deal with perpendicular lines. So we got number 7 there. We got number 15 here. We got number 16 here. And we got number 18. Okay. Each one says something a little bit different. Well, actually, a couple of them sound very different. Like 7 doesn't sound like any of the rest of them, really. 15 and 16 are converses of each other. 18 says if you've got some perpendicular stuff with a bunch of other things, then the angles that form are complementary. Okay, so let's take a look at number 1. Let's go back to 1. It says if perpendicular, then you get a right angle. Okay, so of these 4 highlighted ones that deal with perpendicular, only one of them says anything about a right angle, and that's number 7. So this one, definition of perpendicular lines. Number 2 says if BD, this one, is perpendicular to AC, this one here, then 3 is congruent to 4. And notice 3 and 4 are next to each other. So this is basically saying if you have perpendicular, then you get some congruent angles that are next to each other. Well, if you look at the highlighted ones, that's not what 7 says. 7 just says perpendicular gives 90 degrees. It's not what 15 says, because 15 says start out with congruent angles. This one you start out with perpendicular lines. But if you look at 16, it fits perfectly. If you have perpendicular lines, which we do, then they form congruent adjacent angles, which they do. So this one, the way we've abbreviated this, perpendicular lines give congruent adjacent angles. Okay, let's take a look at 3. So 3 says if DC, this one, is perpendicular to DA, this one, then 7 here and 8 here are complementary. Okay, now of the ones that are highlighted, only one of them has anything to do with the word complementary, and that's number 18. So let's just double check to see if 18 is actually correct. So over here it says DC is perpendicular to DA. And in our reason here it says if the exterior sides of 2 adjacent acute angles are perpendicular. Okay, let's check. DC and DA are the exterior sides of 2 adjacent acute angles, 7 and 8. Those are my adjacent acute angles. And they're perpendicular. So we've got the if part of this thing. That's all taken care of. The then part says the angles are complementary, and that's what it says here. So that's our reason. Exterior sides, perpendicular, give us complementary angles. Okay. Let's look at 5 here, because 5 also deals with perpendicular. So in 5, whoops, I erased the highlighting. Let me put that back. Whoops, yeah, that's right. So in 5 it says, if 4 is congruent to 6, so here's 4, here's 6. And so they're saying those 2 angles next to each other are congruent. Then you get AC here is the same thing as BD here. Or not same thing, because perpendicular to it. Okay, so we started with some congruent angles, and we got some perpendicular lines. Well, this one doesn't talk about congruent angles, just talks about 90 degrees. This one talks about congruent angles. and this one talks about congruent angles. And if you notice, one of them starts with them and one of them ends with them. So we want the one that starts with them. And just to double check, look at the picture and make sure they're adjacent. 4 and 6 are adjacent. And it says then the lines are perpendicular. And right here it says then the lines are perpendicular. So we've got reason number 15, which we can abbreviate. 2 lines give you some congruent adjacent angles. Well, that results in perpendicular lines. Okay, let's take a look at 4 and 6 now, because now we've dealt with the perpendicular stuff. Okay, 4 says, let me erase all these. 4 says if 7 and 8 are complementary, then 7 plus 8 equals 90. Okay, well, hopefully you're getting into the habit of just saying if they're complementary, then you know that they have to add up to 90. You don't even need the picture for that. Why? Because that's what complementary angles are. Definition of complementary angles. And number 6 says 4 and 5 are the same. Now hopefully that wouldn't be too hard to figure out. 4 and 5, they're vertical angles, so we're using reason number 8 right here. Vertical angles are congruent. Okay, so that's it for the first chunk. Find the video for these problems here and watch that one to double check those.